Okay, this is part two of my discussion of the Carl Barks comic books, and something I just remembered noticing here. A little quote by George Lucas right on the front of it: "A priceless part of our literary heritage." If I find time at some point, maybe I'll actually go through and I'll do a quick review of these one by one. Maybe I'll rank them. That would be fun to do. But definitely, I've showed you my top three. Only a Poor Old Man, The Terror of the Beagle Boys, and The Seven Cities of Gold. And they're endlessly rereadable, too. Something I want to talk about really quick was just other things related to these. So if these had any fault, it's that at the back they provide these scholarly articles about them, commentary, and a bunch of them, some of them are by people who write comic books. Some of them are by even some famous people. They have introductions in some cases for these books by famous people. So, for example, this first one has an appreciation by George Lucas. It is great. I definitely recommend reading this. This is George Lucas's full-page recommendation for why he thinks that these are a priceless part of our literary heritage. That's what he actually ends this little speech with, and I completely agree with him. And they tell so much of the history of America, too. But for the essays in the back, they're mostly just complete junk. 95% of them do nothing but just repeat what happened in the story with nothing insightful to say about them whatsoever. They literally just say what happened in the story, and that is totally uninteresting. That's totally not insightful. And the other 5% tends to be just like garbage literary criticism of the sort of modernistic type you would get from like a run-of-the-mill like English class at some middling snobby university. So completely worthless commentary. It either errs on the side of like just snobby academic junk instead of really actually engaging with it as like a meaningful work of art to people, or you're just getting, here's what happened. Oh, thanks, I didn't notice that when I read the story. So those are totally worthless. You could skip all of them. That does not contribute in any way to these value of these printings. I've also had a couple that had misprints. That's maybe because mine, was the first run of them. But I've had a couple weird misprints. One of my misprints actually was that I was missing some of those essays. And I don't care in the slightest because they could leave them out entirely. They contribute nothing. Although I do like the introductions. The introductions, which are more just reflections in general on the comics, their impact, the Carl Barks, and what he's contributed. Carl Barks is one of the Disney legends, and I mean that's a particular designation you can get. I think maybe the Sherman Brothers and some others have it. So I want to talk about other adaptations really quick. Of course, we wouldn't have things like, say, the Ducktales video game if it weren't for this. People like me, when I was a kid, I wanted so much to have a Donald Duck birthday cake, and I remember I ended up with an Uncle Scrooge birthday cake, and I was a little disappointed. They didn't, which ironically, you'd think Scrooge would be far more obscure. I'm not sure how they made that mistake. Spent a lot of time as a kid having fun playing that DuckTales video game. The old DuckTales cartoon, one that is a lot of fun. It backs down the significance of Donald, adds extra characters like Webby, who some people say, oh, too cutesy, and you got Doofus and all these other people. I think it's actually really great how they fleshed out the world. I think it's an excellent adaptation. They're fun. They're fun classics, They're its quality. It kind of helped relaunch Disney TV. Basically, Disney TV cartoons had kind of collapsed. I mean, first they had cartoons and they had short cartoons, and over time they just fell apart until the TV side of it was gone, and then it was just the movies, and then the movies were on the verge of absolute collapse. They were super shaky, and then they had this sudden renaissance where they came roaring back. And then they relaunched their TV programs too, and you got the Disney Afternoon, which is very much built on the back of Ducktales as this big hit. And I'm still a fan of Ducktales. It's still fun to watch. It's a lot shallower than the comic books. The comic books are a lot funnier, a lot smarter, a lot more educational, just a lot more everything. But the DuckTales cartoon is fun. It's a fun kid show. That's a perfect kid show just for little kids to watch. The new DuckTales show is good. I wouldn't actually say it's better than the old DuckTales. It certainly looks nice. I like the style a lot. The visual style is really good. They bring in a lot of the same characters. There's some very fun episodes. I really like that they brought back a lot of classic villains. They there's a neat crossover with Darkwing Duck. That's great. And I have to say, one of my favorite things that came out of DuckTales was Darkwing Duck. I was more of a once they came out with that, I loved that. That was like Disney's Batman, basically, but funny. And I also still think Darkwing Duck really holds up. It's a whole lot of fun. It's zany, it's satirical, it's got wonderful voice acting. It's really good. The new DuckTales, of course, with David Tennant, it's got some good voice actors in it. They managed to give each of the kids a more individual personality. But in its own way, it also is just different cliches. Webby's a different cliche, but still kind of a cliche. It also leans too heavy into the idea of itself. Like, you can tell that this is an adaptation of an adaptation of an adaptation, and not quite as much this original creative thing, because it almost tells its own story too much. It's hard to put my finger on exactly what that is, but it's the same way in some of the Don Rosa ones where it just pushes too hard on certain things, or it too much telling its idea of its own mythology is too big. It makes everything too big also. Like this idea of Scrooge as an adventurer, it's not the idea of Scrooge as an adventurer is not talked about hardly ever in these. It's just part of life. And even when the kids occasionally do try to be like, oh, you've gone on a lot of adventures, Uncle Scrooge has his personalities just like, yeah, that, whatever, I'm just really good at stuff, he's not like, I'm Indiana Jones. He doesn't have this idea of himself, and he doesn't blab on about it, self-reflectively. They just do the things, and they just happen sort of organically, even when they're crazy and over the top. Like I said, with the Atlantis one, it starts out a very mundane sort of thing. It starts out with Donald getting into this argument with Scrooge about coin collecting. So that makes even the zanier stories more grounded. A lot of Donald and Scrooge's biggest adventures start very mundane with just the ordinary ups and downs of life that somehow stumble into this, and often reluctantly, because it's not like Donald or Scrooge are like, I'm an adventurer, let's go get adventure, family, yeah! Like, that, they don't do, there's none of that. It's far more organic, it's far more well written, in my opinion, and you develop those feelings for it based on having enjoyed the story, whereas other adaptations like Don Rosa, and especially the second DuckTales reboot, like, they talk about the editorialization of it and the feelings of it, and it's like, well, you should be producing those feelings, not telling me about them or looking back on them. And so it leans way too hard into that. And some of the characters are kind of goony in the new one too, but some of them are fun and fun twists on things. I like their tech billionaire villain. That's a fun that's a fun modern addition, and you can see they're adding in something new, and it allows them to be kind of creative, and bring something new to it. Um, so I don't know, mixed bag. I wouldn't necessarily say the new one is better, and there's some things I like less about it. Um, they had more opportunity to involve Donald more and take it closer to the comic books, and they are using a more comic booky style, but in the end, they kind of didn't do that. Like I said, the whole Wendy fangirl element too, about the adventurous Scrooge McDuck, whatever. For me, that, as someone who grew up on the comic books, like that doesn't work. And like I said, I feel like it's dependent. It's too self-referential. Instead of just telling you the story, it's trying to build up the idea of this story that's already being looked back on by someone who's a fan. And I feel like that's slightly lazy, maybe. Anyway, but that might be personal taste. Other people may get a kick out of it. It's still a fun. It's still a fun show. There's particular episodes that especially really remind me of the old Ducktales. Like the one where they run into the Egyptian-y people underground. That one very much reminds me of the old DuckTales. Also, they take a very different direction with the personalities of the three kids, and it's hard to say whether that's... I'd say that's a wash compared to the old one. The kids in the first DuckTales show, very spunky and productive. They seem natural, like kids. They gave them more personality in the new one, and individual personalities, and so you can tell them apart, but as a result, they're also, in their own way, kind of stereotypes themselves, and also they're weird and feel even less like kids to me. Like, they very much have that modern kid thing where they seem more like an adult, and not much like an actual kid anymore. They seem like a sort of adult character type. So, like I said, mixed bag on that. One other, it's not really directly connected to it. It's more to the original Disney cartoons. But if you watch those new Mickey Mouse cartoons that are also done in kind of an old sort of comic book drawing style, with Mickey and Donald and Goofy are the three main characters in it, but all sorts of other characters show up from all over the Disney universe. Now, I would say that those cartoons are actually excellent. Like, it's the best comedic cartoon work that I have seen from Disney for years, for decades. Like, it's as good as the old Goofy cartoons that had the real magic, and the old Donald and Mickey cartoons from the old days, going back to like the 40s. It's really a throwback to those old times, and has a lot of the same sense of humor, the same playfulness. I very much recommend watching those. Those are just absolutely fantastic cartoons. I didn't think Disney had it in them to make a short form cartoon of that quality right now. But whoever is doing it, and I know that they work with various people. I know they had some of the SpongeBob people work on it, things like that. But it's great. It's great, and you do see Donald show up in those a lot. He's not the Donald from the Carl Barks works. He's the pre-Carl Barks Donald. But he's in there, and sometimes you get Uncle Scrooge too, and sometimes you get Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and a bunch of these other characters that Carl Barks actually did develop. And so that's fun to have them in there. And I'm glad that so many of the Carl Barks characters have actually gone on to become staples and crossovers within the larger Disney world. Okay, now I'm going to close off this discussion by just talking about one very small matter of virtually no importance, and it's the something that you might wonder about, which is Uncle Scrooge, the way he dives into his money and swims in his money and throws it up and lets it hit him on the head. And I have to say, when I was a kid, I was so entranced by that idea that I actually spent a lot of time saving my money. My brother and sister, they spent their money. I saved it so that my grandparents gave me money when I was just a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old. And when I graduated high school, I still had that original money I used to start my savings account. And one of the things I did with my money was I converted it into coins, and I got a big cardboard box and put coins and bills and covered the whole bottom of it with money and got into it and had a Scrooge McDuck money bath. And that's, of course, when you find out that coins are made out of metal, and they're not very comfortable, and they're almost impossible to move through in any way because of the way they lay together, and that if you throw them up and they hit you on your head, they actually hurt because they're made out of metal. And so, even in one of the cartoons, they reference it. I think it's in the Ducktales reboot or something where or maybe it's in one of the Don Roses where Uncle Scrooge dives into the money and the kids think he's like committing suicide or something. And then he goes and he's swimming through it and there's like, how does he do that? And I just like to point out that Carl Barks, who invented it, addressed that very early on, that it is not a normal thing. And it's actually in this story, Only a Poor Old Man, where Scrooge loses, the dam holding back the lake of his money breaks, the Beagle Boys get it, and he outwits them. And the way he outwits them is he's like, well, now that you're rich, you should enjoy your money. And he says, here's what I do. And he says, look, I like to burrow in it and dive in it, and I like to toss it up and hit me on the head. And they're like, that sounds fun. And he convinces them to do it, and this is what happens to them. They all end up totally knocked out and totally damaged. And the kids say, Uncle Scrooge, how come you dived all the way from that bluff and you didn't get hurt? And this is the only answer you're going to get from Carl Barks anywhere. He just says, well, I'll admit, it's a trick. And that's it. That's his whole explanation. So that's how come Uncle Scrooge can do it. He sees that it happens. He makes the mention. He says, how odd, the Beagle Boys bounced like they hit a solid wall, which is what would actually happen, as I discovered as a child. Anyway, that finishes my discussion of Carl Barks, the Carl Barks universe, Don Rosa, the Ducktales adaptations. All of them are wonderful. And if I had to put them in any ranking of what I like, I would put the two DuckTales adaptations about even. Yeah, I put them about dead level. I feel like they're equally good. And if you have a chance to watch the DuckTales movie, it's that rare case where Disney made a movie based on a TV show of theirs of the time. It actually came out really well. It's a fun movie. It's so many of those DuckTales episodes were really like 3-4 part, stories anyway. So they were already doing almost movie length stories on the original DuckTales show. And so, yeah, it worked great. You get a little higher production value. You get Christopher Lloyd as the villain. And, of course, he's Christopher Lloyd. He's great as the villain, as Murloc. So, yes, The Treasure of the Lost Lamp. And I loved that it brought into another one of my favorite stories, the story of the magic lamp, and the treasure of Kali Baba. That, to me, was very, very DuckTales-y. And so, good material, and then above the sort of DuckTales level stuff, I would put Don Rosa. I would say Don Rosa is a step up, of course. It is funnier. There are more locations, more variety, more complicated stories, more exploration, and his art is incredibly sumptuous. I mean, that's one thing you cannot fault Don Rosa for, is you cannot fault the quality of his art. The quality of Don Rosa's art, he puts just as much work into it as Carl Barks did, giving you these wondrous, sumptuous pictures you can just absolutely get lost in, with wonderful action. He captures action really well, which Carl Barks was also very good at. In a slightly different way, I feel like it's got a little less realism stylistically than what Carl Barks had. It's a little zanier, but his world overall is just a slightly more hypercharged world and version of the Duck world than Carl Barks's is. But it is well worth exploring. You're going to find great moments and very cinematic. He's got great cinematic scenes, and moments and stuff like, this is where they're throwing the crown into the whirlpool to be lost forever because it's thing. And then you find out this treasure that's been missing and no one could find through the whole story. That's where it's been the whole time. No one ever realized that's what happened to it. So wonderful artwork. I really, like I said, I have criticisms of Don Rosa in comparison, and then I feel like it's not quite as good as Karl Barks. It's a little little too much looking back, too many stories that connect backwards. He sort of oversells it, makes some slight changes to the characters based on his own preferences. But you know what? That's fine. For what he gives you, it's totally worth it. This is one of the most hilarious stories he does. This is a wonderful part where Donald is gradually, over the course of the entire story, falling off a skyscraper in various stages, trying to get back in. Things keep going wrong. That ends up with him getting in the building and then falling back out of it. Private security and police end up arguing over who's rescuing him, and then they end up dropping him again. And then you think he's going to make it, and then a pigeon breaks it. And it's just a complete slapstick knee slapper through the whole thing, you know, where crash, smash, bounce, back out. And now he's back out of the building again. So I really do love Don Rosa. But as I said, this is the gold standard for me. This was defined so much of my childhood. I would sit around, I would read the stories. I had specific snacks I like to eat. I had places I like to kind of hide on my own in the house and sit there with my comic books and read and munch on my Donald Duck snacks, which tended to be chocolate milk and saltine crackers. That's what I liked. Anyway, so if you get a chance, for sure, pick up some of these. You can get them on Amazon. They're not that expensive. I mean, you get hundreds of pages of high-quality stuff. You get a couple hundred pages for $20. You can't get them in 2-packs, too. A bunch of these come in 2-packs or other multi-packs. If you buy them just as they're coming out, they come in singles, but if they've already come out, especially for the more popular ones, you can get like 2 of them together, like like this, and so that's fun. Same thing with the Don Rosas; those almost all come in multi-packs. This is Don Rosa Volume 3, and a volume is always 2 books. These ones are slightly taller than these two. I don't know why they made them slightly different. It probably has to do with the way they were printed. You know, these are 20, 30 years, several decades older than these, and so maybe that's just changes in the way they printed them. Anyway, so that's all I have to say for today. This is Mr. Nobody saying goodbye for now.